discussion. This should be way more interaction, we hope. So please first welcome Tone Vays on behalf of Bitcoin. And Justin Bones on behalf of Bitcoin Cash.
What's the matter?
Okay, let's spend 2 minutes on logistics. This is the breakdown. So both of the speakers will be having 4 minutes for introduction, 3 minutes for rebuttal, 3 minutes cross-examination, and 2 minutes final statement. The problem is the first thing, toss a coin. I don't have any coin. Can anyone help me? Like €1. I mean, we have to be happy with the discount. Okay, here is the coin.
Hi, want to call it?
Heads.
Heads still. Heads?
Yep.
Tails it is. Alright.
Okay, so
Alright.
we allow both of you.
Oh, wait, if I won, do I get to choose who goes first?
Do you need time for preparation?
Why don't you go first?
Sure.
Okay, we can allow up to 3 minutes for preparation. Is it okay? Okay.
I'm good. Go ahead.
Yeah, 3 minutes.
Right. So my main argument is that BCH is superior to BTC in terms of the goals of achieving the best censorship-resistant peer-to-peer electronic cash system and a digital gold. BTC is limiting itself to just being a digital gold, a purely speculative asset with no underlying utility. I think that a cryptocurrency like BCH that can achieve all of these characteristics of being both cash, digital gold, and more, has a much stronger value proposition. By capturing more use cases and utility, it captures more value, which strengthens the cryptocurrency security and therefore also its decentralization. BTC, in my view, is fundamentally flawed. I do in fact agree with the original design of Bitcoin. However, BTC has over time fundamentally changed its economic and governance design. It is these changes to the original design that I disagree with. Since Bitcoin needs to pay for its security over the longer term with inflation, with fees when inflation decreases, BTC and BCH represent radically different approaches to this problem. The comparison can be made that BTC is a low-volume, high-fee network, whereas BCH is a high-volume, low-fee network. My criticism of BTC is that fees will have to approach more than $50 per transaction in order to pay for its security at current scale. This I consider to be completely unviable, especially in a world where competitors like BCH exist and are able to offer the same product at much lower cost. Furthermore, if BTC fees do not consistently approach this price point, then that means that the long-term security model of BTC is broken, unable to pay for its own security. In other words, BTC cannot compete with an inexpensive, more secure, and therefore also more decentralized BCH. It is not just the cost that makes BTC unviable at larger scale. The user experience in a congested network is terrible. A congested blockchain network is the equivalent of a blind auction for transactions. It is impossible to predict what fee you need to pay for a transaction when that transaction is sent, which means that there's always a chance that the transaction is dropped or takes a very long time to confirm. This could take hours or even days. In contrast, for small value transactions in BCH, merchants can accept a BCH transaction within seconds, leading to a much better user experience. Even worse is that the capacity for BTC to be used by any significant amount of people is simply not there. It would take more than 80 years for everyone in the world to just do a single transaction in BTC. This, in my view, is simply not viable, even as a world reserve currency. It does not make sense that people would choose to use such a flawed system. It makes even less sense for institutions to adopt this technology without the underlying grassroots adoption by everyday people. The reality is that the majority of people in this room are able to run 4 nodes with 23 megabyte blocks. If the argument is that people in the developing world need to be able to run 4 nodes, then I will argue it is more important that these disenfranchised people are instead able to viably use Bitcoin. It does not make sense for people in poor countries to run a full node for a network they cannot afford to use. Bitcoin can scale, and I do not see any reason why it should not scale.
Okay, thanks, Justin. Now we'll allow 4 minutes for talk.
All right. Satoshi Nakamoto created something with his white paper in 2008, and it was launched in 2009. At first, it didn't have any value, and now it has a lot of value. Bitcoin has 3 fundamental properties that give it value. It is unconfiscatable if you properly protect your private keys. It is censorship-resistant value transfer, in that there is no middleman as you're transferring this Bitcoin from one person to another. And it has an unchangeable monetary policy. Now, Satoshi, in order to keep the first 2 fundamental principles intact, the third principle is that it should be impossible to change its monetary policy. Because if you could change its monetary policy, then it's hard to argue that your value transfer is unconfiscatable and your value transfer is censorship resistant. The monetary policy that he chose was gold style, where you have a finite supply of Bitcoin, and that's where we are. None of that implies that Bitcoin is free. None of that implies that Bitcoin is instant. And none of that implies that Bitcoin necessarily has to be private. We are stuck with these fundamental features. Now we have to figure out, how do we scale Bitcoin? How do we make it as cheap as possible? How do we make it as private as possible? And how do we make it as fast as possible without endangering those fundamental principles? Because if you endanger those fundamental principles, then the entire concept of value in a blockchain will probably be lost. Bitcoin may not be the fastest, may not be the cheapest, may not be the private right now, but it is the one that people trust and people have the most confidence in. Because if people migrate to another blockchain, what is to say they're not going to migrate to another blockchain after that, and another blockchain after that? Why would you want to save any value in your blockchain if they're so fungible? If the blockchain itself is fungible, then it's almost like the Venezuelan currency. You get it and you want to spend it as soon as possible, because holding on to it for a day or 2 can get you into trouble. I've been a trader. I've been too busy to trade. We all saw the news that broke in the last 24 hours. One broker got shut down. I had, a fraction of a Bitcoin on one broker. I've been too lazy to withdraw it. Now it's gone. I'll never be able to get that, right? Why do you want that property in your blockchain? And that's what happens when you try to push an inferior blockchain, because I will do my rebuttal in a minute to some of those points. So we have second layer. Scaling needs to be on a second layer, because if you try to scale the first layer, you endanger the most critical properties of the blockchain. And Satoshi put in the 1 megabyte block limit. At the time, he didn't realize that it's impossible to raise it because it would cause a split. And now we are going to do everything right. Scalability, cheap transactions, and more private transactions on a second layer. And it will be amazing. It's already happening.
Thank you. So now 3 minutes.
Should I go first this time? Are we alternating, or it doesn't matter? So I go first on the rebuttal.
Well, what you prefer?
I
So
believe
3
it's
minutes for rebuttal.
my turn for rebuttal, I believe.
It's up to you.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
3
I think
minutes
up to the
for
moderator. I think Yanni must decide here.
Go for it. I don't. It doesn't
Who
matter to me.
starts?
Tom can start.
Okay.
On the rebuttal
It's yours.
part. I'll keep
Or
going.
You can still toss
Toss a
the coin,
coin.
you know.
Toss a coin.
Toss the Bitcoin.
No, it's fine. I'll do a quick rebuttal. So, as part of your opening statement, you mentioned that Bitcoin's governance is failing, and but Bitcoin has no governance. If you are blockchain has governance. It's not decentralized. The whole point of a true decentralized blockchain is the fact that it has no governance. Because if there is governance, then it's corruptible. Then the governance has a say. So there is a problem. Anytime people think there's governance, people like to blame Blockstream for everything. Blockstream has what, maybe 2 or 3 developers now? The Gregory Maxwell, that their CTO, one of the top Bitcoin developers, he's not even Blockstream anymore. People wanted to go off on their own. They got tired of all the criticism. People suggest the best possible code changes. I believe these are the smartest people we have in the world of programming blockchains, and they come up with the best possible solutions. As far as costs go, yeah, back in November, December, when Bitcoin was so popular that it was going up to $20,000, the blockchain was a little bit stressed. It was very popular. Like, I'm sorry that you can't say that, well, that restaurant is terrible, I can never get a seat, it's too crowded, right? That's what happened to Bitcoin. Bitcoin became very popular, everyone wanted to use it, and a lot of malicious actors wanted to, promote their own alternative projects. And when Bitcoin network was functioning at capacity, it took very little effort and very little money to basically throw a wrench into the clog that was Bitcoin. It was very easy to make Bitcoin slow and expensive. And it's okay. It's designed to handle that with raised fees. Now, the alarm was sound way too early. And right now, you can just Google Lightning Network. There are people building coffee machines. You can pay for your coffee with Lightning. You can pay for almost anything with Lightning. It's gonna be, the scaling is happening in the proper way, and Lightning will be even more private and even faster and even cheaper. And the problem with all of these alternatives, including Bitcoin Cash, it is centralized. The mining is way more centralized. The holding of those coins is way more centralized, and it has governance. The development is way centralized with inferior developers.
Thank you, Tom. Sorry, Justin. Just some remark. Even when you whisper someone in the back, this room has perfect acoustics and we can hear everything. So please remain silent while speakers are speaking. Thank you. Justin, your turn.
Okay, time for my rebuttal. I'll counter what you said here. You mentioned that BTC is not confiscatable, it's censorship resistant, it has all of these characteristics, free characteristics you referred to. Well, I would argue that BCH also has all of these characteristics, and BCH can also be used as a currency and is therefore also more useful. The idea to say that somehow BCH is centralized and BTC is not, I think, does not really hold water, considering that essentially they are identical besides some minor changes and a block size increase. So to argue that BCH is centralized because of its design, the same logic would actually mean that actually BTC is also therefore centralized. And that is obviously a flawed argument. You also mentioned gold as an example, that BTC is like a digital gold. Well, it's worth mentioning here that gold does not have a limit on throughput. You mentioned that hard forks are bad, essentially. I made some notes about that. And I think that in order to accept a change to the network, it should not be passive. Hard forks are better because people have to consciously agree to that change. The ability to hard fork represents the check that we have against the power that development team could hold. We should have multiple client implementations with competing development teams. It should be a concept of decentralization itself. Now, what I mean by that is that the ability to hard fork is actually the mechanism within a protocol that actually ensures the freedom of its participants. The ability to hard fork means you do not have to go along with another set of rules. You also mentioned that having governance is a bad thing. I think that all blockchains have governance, and if you deny the governance of a blockchain, you're actually creating something that's more dysfunctional. Blockchains require governance because blockchains need to be able to change. Under the scenario that you described, actually, we're dealing with a network that is unable to change, that's essentially static. I have 1 minute left, so I'm just going to touch on the Lightning Network. I consider that the Lightning Network is actually not a good replacement for on-chain transactions. There's multiple problems with the Lightning networks, but first of all, I'd like to say that I consider it reckless and irresponsible to depend on and bet the future of BTC on an unproven and unfinished technology. There's multiple problems. One is the routing problem, which means that we have not figured out how to do decentralized routing within a distributed Lightning network. This means that we end up with a hub and spoke model, which in terms of its structure is not too different from the current banking system. There's also the liquidity problem, which means that the amount of capital that will have to be locked up in Lightning nodes would have to be in the billions in order to facilitate the amount of transactions to replace the on-chain functionality. And again, these Lightning nodes are essentially hot wallets. So I consider it unviable for large institutions to risk that much capital. It's essentially a huge security risk. Now, as an example, I'd like to use a coffee purchase as an example. If I were to purchase a coffee, I'd have to find out what Lightning Hub the coffee shop is using. Looks like I'm out of time here, so all right. Thank you.
Next round, cross-examination. Tom, 3 minutes.
So Bitcoin Cash is more centralized than Bitcoin by default. We already know that Satoshi may have 500,000 to 1 million Bitcoin that he's never used. So obviously he has between 500,000 and 1 million Bitcoin Cash, which he's never converted, or assuming never converted. But now we also know that Bitmain has 1 million Bitcoin Cash. And since the majority of the old school Bitcoiners sold their Bitcoin Cash, and we know that there's more users in Bitcoin, we know that there's a lot less users in Bitcoin Cash. So the concentration of wealth of Bitcoin Cash is significantly more centralized than Bitcoin. We know for a fact that mining is way more centralized, because when you look at who's mining Bitcoin Cash, there's like a 40% chunk that says unknown. You don't even know if that's one of the same miners that has another chunk that says 20%. So we know by default it's more centralized. What has Bitcoin Cash forked over a year ago? What have they done? What innovation have they created? What have they programmed? Can you name 3 developers that are globally respected as developers of blockchains that are working on their protocol? Because I can name a dozen, 20, probably over 20 people right now that are coding in Bitcoin. As for a Lightning network, it is completely decentralized. I plan to have my own Lightning node, and I plan to have it anonymously, and I plan to route all transactions. I have been mining Bitcoin for about 2 years now with a single miner, and I lose money on that miner. I do it because I believe in Bitcoin, and I run my node and I run my miner just to help decentralize the network. This is the kind of people that believe in the future of Bitcoin. How many people you know that are going to be running and spending money running Bitcoin Cash nodes, running Bitcoin Cash miners, and in my case, running a Lightning node probably for free and losing some money on it, just to help decentralize the network. We've heard a lot from the Bitcoin Cash side that regular people that have a $200 computer should never run a node because it's inefficient. So what does that mean? Only the big institutions are going to be able to run nodes? That centralizes the entire system. That loses the entire point. So you gotta be able to know where the little guys can actually make a difference. Okay.
So the purpose of...
Last round for final statements, and then we allow more.
I still have a cross-examination, I believe.
One more cross.
Sorry.
One more cross.
And the cross-examination actually involves asking questions.
Sure,
to the
go
other
for
guy.
it.
So you say that BCH is centralized, but BCH is a decentralized public cryptocurrency which uses pure proof of work as a consensus algorithm. Like I mentioned before, this is identical to BTC. So the claim that it is centralized does not hold water. Furthermore, saying that it's centralized because of mining power also does not make sense, because Bitcoin Cash uses the same mining algorithm. So the miners are essentially the same on BTC as they are on Bitcoin Cash. You say that Bitcoin Cash is a scam. You say that it is centralized, but can you point to anything concrete to prove those claims?
I've never said it's a scam. The way it's being branded is scammy, but unlike actual scams like Dash and Ripple and Steemit, or I can name them all day. Bitcoin Cash is actually it's a somewhat legitimate blockchain, and it's not an opinion, right? It's you can say whatever you like. The Ethereum people still say that they are decentralized, and yet they rolled back their transactions.
Everyone is free to have an opinion, but as far as I can see, you're not actually pointing to any technical reality, any difference in the code.
Well, do you think Ethereum is decentralized?
I do, yes.
You do, but it's been proven that they're not.
This is a different argument. You're changing the subject, and I'd also like to respond to what you're saying about the core developers being the best developers. I would consider this more to be an appeal to authority, and I think it's better to actually stick to the facts. So I ask you again, why is Bitcoin Cash centralized? You mentioned distribution, and the distribution does not affect the centralization or decentralization of a cryptocurrency in this case. Well, it definitely affects markets.
I specifically said more centralized than Bitcoin, right? There are levels of decentralization, and you want the highest level of decentralization.
Correct.
So Bitcoin Cash is more centralized than Bitcoin, which to me puts it in centralized.
But you're not actually saying why it's more centralized. You're not actually giving an argument. Because the distribution of coins is different? Why? You're not actually identifying.
The distribution of coins is way more centralized than Bitcoin, so more people have a say.
That does not mean that BCH is centralized. And furthermore, I would actually argue that BTC is more centralized due to its centralization of development, whereas BCH has multiple competing clients, which therefore creates a better environment for these choices to come about.
Multiple competing clients is just going to create multiple forks. Let's see what happens with Bitcoin Cash in November, where they may or may not fork again.
Well, I think forks are really a necessary part of the system. It's part of the system that actually ensures the freedom and allows us to have the freedom of choice, which is what I think is Bitcoin is very much about that.
I think if your currency hard forks, outside of a major bug that mandates the hard fork, because of the only hard forks that should ever happen are bug related hard forks. If it's political hard fork,
I don't see any
your
blockchain
is a disaster.
I don't see any reason why that would be true. I want the chain to fork. So Bitcoin Cash forked from Bitcoin Core because Bitcoin Cash did not agree with SegWit. So we have the freedom, we have the right to not agree, to protest. And that, therefore, the mechanism to hard fork is a critical governance mechanism of a proof of work blockchain.
Having 100 different currencies is like having none.
Well, we have more than 1,500 different currencies, and that's the reality we have today. And I think that's the reality we should accept. We should be, realistic, pragmatic, and not be maximalist in our views.
Okay, we are adding 2 minutes more to agree. Consensus?
Sure.
Yeah, 2 minutes more.
We ask questions.
So we have some time for questions at the end, actually. So I would say I would go back to relying so much on the Lightning Network, actually, because I think some of these problems are really unassailable. So in order to fund a Lightning channel, I actually have to do an on-chain transaction, which, as I mentioned before, is very expensive. Then I need an on-chain transaction is very expensive. If Bitcoin, okay, fine. Let's say on-chain transactions are not expensive. What happens to the long-term security model of Bitcoin? It breaks, right? What pays for the security of the network?
But wait, your earlier argument was for cheap transactions, but now you're asking for expensive transaction?
It's a high volume versus having a low volume of transactions. These are the two different philosophies. So tell me, what happens if Bitcoin does not have high transaction fees in 50 years from now? The long-term security model of Bitcoin is essentially broken.
Well, you just said that you have to fund a Lightning node. So we already have thousands of Lightning nodes.
Okay, so then
funding your Lightning nodes could be, we can have like in 3 years, we can have more transactions funding Lightning nodes than we currently have transactions.
Can you accept, based on the calculations I showed you before, that fees will have to approach at least $50 per transaction? And in order to fund a Lightning node and it costs you $50 to do that, that is not a good user experience. That's not a useful system to use. And that's one of the major flaws of the Lightning Network, is that transactions still need to be settled on chain. And
eventually.
BTC is limited. And BTC needs to have high fees. So I'm saying, therefore, the user experience.
But do you believe that
expensive.
data storage is infinite and free and cheap, and the movement of that data is infinite and free and cheap?
That's a straw man. What you're doing. I'm not saying that at all. Of course, there is a fee, because otherwise, the blockchain
If
can be
I
spammed.
wanted to spend, if next week I felt like spending, a few $100,000, I can make the 8 megabyte blockchain very not dysfunctional.
So to counter,
I just don't want to waste that money.
So to counter that point, actually, a blockchain like BCH, if you actually run the numbers in terms of how expensive is it to attacker to spam that blockchain, it is actually far more expensive to do more damage on a blockchain that has a high block size limit versus a congested blockchain with a low.
Well, that's because your blockchain is not congested. No one's using it, right? What happened was the reason why Bitcoin was easy to attack is because everybody was using it at the time.
My point is that Bitcoin Cash is more expensive to attack.
Well, yeah, because when no one is using your blockchain, it's expensive to attack.
It's more
when your
expensive.
blockchain is working at capacity because people are using it, it becomes very cheap to attack.
But it's much more expensive to attack because the block size limit is higher. I think this is a fact and something that I think should be accepted.
But every time you raise the block size limit, you are centralizing your blockchain because it takes time to propagate that large block, to validate that large block. So even with 1 megabyte blocks, we have miners that refuse to waste half a second validating that block. So what happens when it's a 300 megabyte block instead of 1?
So I would like to counter that point. And the fact is that miners do not run full nodes to mine. There can't be more than 50 pools in the Bitcoin network because of the variance in the mining algorithm. And because of that, these 50 pools are by definition very large operations. And these 50 pools can afford to run full nodes. So as a miner at home, I do not run a full node. I connect directly to a pool. Therefore, increasing the cost of running a full node does not increase mining centralization. And that is a fact. I don't see any other way.
Say that again. Increasing the cost
of running a full node does not increase mining centralization because miners do not run full nodes.
But the pool runs a full node.
Correct, and there can't be more than 50 pools, and these pools can easily afford to run full nodes without any
they can afford it.
Ambitions.
Doesn't mean that they want to do it, right? Like, for example,
if they don't want to do it, they won't mine. It's that simple, and someone else will mine. And
not true at all.
It's a self-balancing system.
We've seen so many empty blocks, and we've seen a lot more of them now. You are incentivized as a miner to find the next block as fast as possible. And when that block takes an extra 2 seconds to validate, you are incentivized not to waste that 2 seconds validating the block. And what happens is people start to join pools that are finding the prior block. Because if you found the prior block, you don't have to validate that block. You just save 2 seconds. Everyone is incentivized to be on your pool until everyone is on one pool or everyone is just one miner.
So first of all, history, I think, proves that we won't see everyone go onto one pool because then you're in fact, destroying the system that you're
on Bitcoin, yes, on a lesser blockchain that you can destroy and move your value to a better valued blockchain, absolutely. I've always said that you're not going to get 51%. Bitcoin will not be 51% attacked. But Bitcoin Cash can, Monero can, any other coin can be 51% attacked because a miner doesn't care if they 51% attack a lesser blockchain because they have another blockchain to move that money into and profit. But if you 51% attack Bitcoin and you destroy Bitcoin and you make people lose confidence in Bitcoin, all blockchains die. You have nowhere to exit, you have nowhere to profit. So by having a lesser blockchain, you're already endangering everybody's value.
That's enough.
So you said before that that if the block is bigger, then miners won't create that block because it's not their incentive to create blocks that are essentially too big for the network. This is
No, they will create the
This
block.
is exactly why I think we don't actually need a block size limit, because miners won't endanger their own business by creating
A
blocks that are too
miner
big.
would be incentivized to create a large block because then they have an advantage of creating the next block and the block after that. And the miner wouldn't care if they destroy that network because they have a higher level network they can move that money into and start mining. Bitcoin Cash will never be able to get above Bitcoin. It's game theory impossible.
I think that what you're saying is actually proven incorrect with the reality on the ground today. Bitcoin Cash works, it's a functioning network, it's not being 51% attacked. In my view, it's a superior blockchain because it has more capacity.
All right, we can leave it here.
And now each of you will have 2 minutes for a final statement. If you need some preps, we can enable 1 minute. But if you feel fine,
I'm good. Who's going first? There we go. Go for it.
So Bitcoin is tended to be a peer-to-peer electronic cash system that also has the characteristics of a digital gold. Bitcoin can scale. The recent stress test even proved that we will have enough capacity for a very long time. BCH just needs to be able to keep up with demand. We have recently proven that BCH has at least 20 times the capacity of BTC and can scale more. BCH is open for business today, BTC is not. I would argue that is what makes BCH superior to BTC.
On-chain scaling with a hard fork just doesn't work. It will always create a split in your currency. Now, you may like the fact that there are 100 currencies out there, just like some people like the fact that there's 100 languages they need to learn to communicate around the world. In reality, it's a lot more easier to communicate around the world with one language. And it's a lot more efficient to have just a single blockchain, and that's what the world is going to migrate to. The fact that there was a 1 megabyte limit, that was it. The core developers explored the idea of raising the block size for scaling, and they realized that there was absolutely nothing that can be done. The chain was going to split, and the only logical solution was to come up with a scaling system that did not require the split of the community. Just because a couple of people did not like it, they went off on their own and they created an altcoin, and that's fine. And that altcoin is going to die like all of the other altcoins. The question is, are you willing to keep your savings in an inferior asset? Are you willing to keep your savings in an asset that is unlikely to succeed? And I am not. I sold my Bitcoin Cash the first moment I could. I sold it on the second week of existence. I got 0.1 Bitcoin for every Bitcoin Cash that I sold. And looking at the price now, it was clearly the smart decision. And I only expect it to go down more. So sure, you can use it for your transactions, but please do not hold anything in there long term, because when Bitmain decides to sell their 1 million Bcash, the value of it is certainly going to zero.
so now it's time for Q&A session. Time limit is like 5 minutes, but we can take up to 3 questions from the audience. The first one is you.
Yeah, Tone, you said you run a Miner and Lightning.
No, I don't run Lightning yet. I haven't had time to
But
figure
you
it out.
know you're going to run it at a loss.
I'm running my miner at a loss. Well, I'm not.
Wait, what happens when you run out of money? Like, what happens to you when your miner drains?
Well, wait a minute. Do you okay, raise your hand if you have a membership to a gym. No, I didn't say go to the gym. I specifically said pay for a membership to the gym. Sponsoring the gym. Okay, right. So again, how many of you travel a lot but still pay for an internet connection, right? Like, you're not going to run out of money. I'm just paying an electric bill, right? I just raised my electric bill by a little bit. It's not like my costs aren't going up. We're not new to paying for something we don't utilize, right? You are paying for future convenience. I always thought that, hey, when mining runs out of fresh Bitcoins to mine, who's going to keep mining? Well, here's an example. Let's say Netflix adopts Bitcoin, and every time you want to watch something on Netflix, you get a QR on the screen. You just pay for your movie or a show or whatever, and you just watch it. This will allow Netflix to go anywhere in the world. No more credit card fraud, no more nothing. If Netflix all of a sudden makes an extra $1 billion a year thanks to Bitcoin, why not waste $200 million a year on mining to decentralize the
If they've got to run the infrastructure to run those lightning nodes and stuff, and it's costing them a negative amount of money, they're not going to run the infrastructure.
But it has to be negative amount of money versus the value that it gives you, right?
No, because you can make money out of it.
I want to decentralize the network, and I'm willing to pay for that a little bit.
Tone, I mean, what you're saying here is an impossibility. I mean, I mentioned before, it'll take 80 years for everyone in the world to do one Bitcoin transaction. If it's actually being used at larger scale, this is impossible. Like, so what you're saying here is factually just wrong. The emperor's not wearing any clothes. BTC is not a system that can be used, and Lightning Network is not ready.
Lightning Network will give you almost infinite amount of transactions a second incredibly cheap, because you can settle to the actual blockchain whenever you like, daily, weekly, monthly, well, maybe not monthly, but daily, weekly, you will settle. Like, if you and I are gonna toss this coin 1,000 times back and forth, why are we using the actual Bitcoin blockchain to settle every single dollar that we're betting per coin flip, instead of settling it at the end of the day, one time when we're tired of flipping that coin?
Look, the fact is that Lightning Network does not work. More than 40% of transactions fail. The routing problem has not been solved.
It's not
the liquidity problem has not been solved.
It's not in
the
production
user experience is exactly my point. What you're talking about is a fantasy.
It
doesn't
not
exist.
in production yet.
You know,
it's not even in beta.
I would warn people to actually, and I mean, you warn people about investing in BTC. I mean, BCH. I would warn people about investing in BTC.
You're complaining that Elon Musk hasn't gotten you to Mars yet.
Right, but we're not going to put all of our eggs in that basket, are we?
Well, of course not. You're going to put like $40 on a Lightning channel, and let's see if it works.
Let's have a second question. Yes, we just will stay here until midnight.
I would like to ask with regards to free market. If free market works, why price of Bitcoin Cash was always a fraction of price of Bitcoin?
I think over the short term, the markets are very irrational. And like my co-founder mentioned before, there's a lot of retail investors in this market that do not fully understand what's going on as well. So yes, I think BTC is flawed. And yes, I think the emperor's not wearing any clothes. And the technical reality is that BTC cannot be used by any significant amount of people. And all of this hope is being poured into this Lightning Network, which as far as we can assess is not something that is functional, and not something that, even under the best scenario, is something that is usable by everyday people.
So you think that free market is irrational since inception of
over the short
Cash?
term? Over the short
since
term.
inception of Bitcoin Cash, to price it at a fraction of...
No, I mean, look, the cryptocurrency market's been very irrational for a very long time. And I think as the market grows, it will become a more efficient market. But over the longer term, this is actually our investment thesis. You know, we invest in what we think are quality projects. We are not invested in BTC for that reason. But things take time, and it takes time for people to understand that. And that's why, a forum like this is really good to actually spread that understanding.
I agree. I agree. The market is very irrational. I publicly stated that the value of Bcash will be about $1 a week after existence. I was very wrong. I continue to believe the market is very irrational, and I'm sticking to my $1 per Bcash target, which is also my target for Ethereum, by the way.
Let's have a third question.
Sorry. So, okay, in that vein then, so I've got friends that I'm trying to, obviously, friends, family that ask me about Bitcoin, that want to get involved. They go on the website and they come to me and they go, I don't know, which one's Bitcoin? Is it Bitcoin Cash? What's this BCH? Why can't we just make a real delineation between what is Bitcoin and what is Bitcoin Cash? I don't understand why Bitcoin Cash is trying to strip the what I would call the name, the brand name value out of Bitcoin.
I think it's good to understand, first of all, in terms of differentiation, we simply use tickers, right? It's a very simple way, BCH, BTC. So we can differentiate easily. I don't think that's a real problem. However, why did Bitcoin Cash try to take the name? Now, I think it's important here to understand the history. The people involved in Bitcoin Cash are people that have been involved in Bitcoin for a very long time. And they don't want the economic design of Bitcoin to be changed. They want Bitcoin to stick to its original vision. So for these people, these Bitcoiners that have been involved for a very long time, to them, Bitcoin Cash is Bitcoin. And I think it's important to understand that because, in many ways, that's also a valid argument at the same time, since it is more consistent with the ideas in the white paper as well. So this is an ideological conflict and there's a lot of disagreements, but the ability to split like this is actually a beautiful thing. It's a graceful solution to an age-old problem. It solves the problem of the tyranny of the majority. If you don't agree with the way that Bitcoin is going, you can split off and create your own Bitcoin. And I think that is freedom and that is the market and allow the best cryptocurrency to win. I don't think that's anything we should be scared of. And I think history has shown as well that hard forks work perfectly fine. It's a protocol upgrade.
So I totally agree with the hard forks. I think it's just the way that it seems like we're trying to strip the brand value out of Bitcoin. At least make it clear. I mean, if you're so confident in Bitcoin Cash, I mean, I'm not wedded to either, but if we're so confident that Bitcoin Cash is going to evolve and become the superior cryptocurrency, let's call it out and separate it and make it and give it a different logo as well. Why not?
Well, I think
if you're so confident, it is so much.
I didn't choose the name, and this is a grassroots movement, and it came up like this, and I think that. I think it's fair that name is used, and yes, I'm not going to deny that there is a battle over the brand of Bitcoin. And that's certainly what has occurred. But if you look at it from the perspective of the people that were involved early and were part of splitting the chain, and the disagreements going back all the way to 2013, 2014, 2015, there's been a long time in the running. And these are two points of view that are actually incompatible with each other. So instead of being at each other's throats on the same protocol, it makes a lot of sense to just live and let live and let both sides go their own way.
I don't see any grassroots movement that started Bitcoin Cash. I see it as like 4 people that didn't like what was happening, and they had the money and the resources, and they had the miners on their side, and they had the media on their side, and they had the economic nodes, all of the companies on their side, and they still failed. So
Bitcoin did not fail. Bitcoin Cash did not fail, and also. You mentioned that BTC tried very hard not to get the chain to fork. They failed. If they didn't want the chain to fork, they should have found compromise.
There was no. You can't compromise. Again, if one person wants to go to the bar next door and the other person wants to be on the moon tomorrow, there is no compromise in between, right? Because you can't compromise on a hard fork. You can't convince everyone in the world to upgrade a node. There is no such thing as a compromise when one of the two sides is impossible to do.
So you just explained exactly why we had to have a split, because the other side was not willing to compromise at all.
Right, and you split, and now the value of that split is 0.067. It pumped yesterday because of Bitmain's IPO. That's very decentralized.
I think if you look at the protocol, it's a proof of work blockchain. It's a public cryptocurrency. It is decentralized.
When your decentralized currency pumps 25% because one company is going IPO on the Hong Kong stock market, you have a problem.
I don't see how that has anything to do with the decentralization of the system. And obviously these systems are still at too small of a scale to really test out these consensus algorithm and governance models. But at the same time, the design is sound. And the design is decentralized. Bitcoin Cash is a decentralized and public cryptocurrency. That is a technical fact. And it seems like you're ignoring that fact.
But it's significantly less decentralized than Bitcoin. I'm not ignoring it. I'm just it's not interesting to me because it's less decentralized.
Again, you haven't actually shown why it is more centralized. You've only said because of the distribution.
Right, distribution of mining, distribution of coins. Like again, what have your developers done? Like the developers that you have coding it. What is their history? The developer that was, front and center for Bitcoin Unlimited, had some experience in scaling telephone networks. That's all they've done.
Again, this is an appeal to authority. You're ignoring the argument.
It's an appeal to expertise, not an appeal to authority. Like, I'm sorry, I would love for people on Reddit to decide how to build a nuclear reactor, but I'd rather leave that up to the nuclear scientists.
I think everyone is free to make the choice of what blockchain to adopt, and that is the grassroots ground level. It's to say no, the experts decide for us, and the experts decide among themselves who are the experts. That's the equivalent of a governance of dictatorship. I mean, I think culturally the governance of Bitcoin is rather dictatorial in that sense. A single monolithic client implementation where a consensus is achieved by kicking out people that don't agree. That is not that is not more decentralized. It is more centralized compared to Bitcoin Cash.
All the people that got kicked out were just incompetent developers.
No questions. I'm sorry. No, keep your questions for networking. Big applause for our speaker.
Thank you.